So, what's trending? Bridging your Catholic faith with your everyday life. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie on Relevant Radio.
It's really simple. You answer the question. Either you are okay with little children having puberty-blocking drugs, cross-sex hormones, and top and bottom surgery, or you're not. And you either have the agenda to force this upon children or you don't. Answer the question. We'll talk about that in just a minute as we discuss the interview of a potential health nominee, actually an actual health nominee from President Joe Biden, that he would like to be in charge of the direction of healthcare for this nation. Also coming up, a psychologist, Dr. Gregory Bottaro, to discuss mindfulness. We're not talking about we are talking about taking the time to be mindful, but as a Catholic. What does that mean with meditation, pausing, silence? Why do we need to work toward a greater sense of silence with our mindfulness? We'll talk about that with our psychologist, Dr. Gregory Bottaro, here on Trending. Here's the deal. You and I, we love Instagram. Maybe you don't. But Instagram has created a new religion. And young people are actually living by it. It's a play-by-play rule book, and they are loving it. I'll share with you a little bit more of what this religion is, how you can get some of it, maybe you already are, and what it says about our Catholic faith and evangelization. If you have a question for our psychologist, Dr. Gregory Bottaro, the number's 1-888-914-9149. So listen to this. Senator Rand Paul, challenged through the hearing, the confirmation hearing, President Biden's health nominee. Now, he nominated Rachel Levine, who is a man, but claims that he is a woman. Listen to this.
I'm alarmed that you won't say with certainty that minors should not have the ability to make the decision to take hormones that will affect them for the rest of their life. Will you make a more firm decision on whether or not minors should be involved in these decisions?
Senator, transgender medicine is a very complex and nuanced field, and if confirmed to the position of Assistant Secretary of Health, I would certainly be pleased to come to your office and talk with you and your staff about the standards of care and the complexity of this field.
Let it go into the record that the witness refused to answer the question. The question is a very specific one. Should minors be making these momentous decisions?
Okay, just to be clear, let's play that again. What did Rachel Levine say in response to the question of whether or not minors should be essentially receiving cross-sex hormones and bodily mutilation by bottom and top surgery? Listen.
Senator, transgender medicine is a very complex and nuanced field.
It is,
and
much
if
unknown
confirmed
about.
to the position of Assistant Secretary of Health, I would certainly be pleased to come to your office and talk with you and your staff about the standards of care and the complexity of this field.
Oh, my goodness. Okay, so let's be clear here. This is a health nominee for helping to guide our nation in terms of the direction of its health care and to establish medical health policies for the nation. Rachel Levine is a former state health official. He is a pediatrician from Pennsylvania, and he is a man who is pretending to be a woman. I'm sorry, but he has no right to be anywhere near children as a pediatrician, number one, and has no right to be anywhere near health care policy. He's a man who is confused about his own sex, and this is unacceptable for us to even be having this conversation. But what do headlines say? This will be the first outwardly spoken transgender person at such a high level of office. Okay. I don't care about being, having kind of a quota for this person and that person. It's sad because businesses are now expected to have not only a quota for races, but also a quota for numbers of transgender individuals. Don't get mad at me for saying it. You know this is true. It's all about diversity. And this is another step in the direction of so-called diversity. But this person shouldn't even be a pediatrician. He is confused about whether or not he's a man or a woman. But here's what we need to pay attention to. What is the media saying about this? And what did Rachel Levine, by the way, he was born Richard Levine, and up until about 9 years ago, 2012, lived and breathed as a man and called himself Richard Levine. So here's the deal. This is their method. Rachel Levine is a man who is trying to enforce transgender policies for children. In fact, has even commented about how he wants to expedite, essentially, the process for children to go through with either hormonal or actual physical sex changes through reconstructive plastic surgery. So here's what he's trying to do. One, the media is trying to call it gender-affirming care, to not say anything's changing, it's just affirming what you believe and feel. Number two, here's their mentality. Don't tell them what we're actually going to do, just do it. So in these hearing confirmations, don't even deny it, just don't say it. Don't deny it, just don't say it. Stick to your talking point. Transgenderism is a complex type of medicine, with a, quote, nuanced field with robust research and standards. So they're not going to tell you what they want to do. They're going to do it and not ask permission. They're going to implement policies for your 3-year-old, your 8-year-old, your 10-year-old, your 12-year-old, your 15-year-old to go behind your back using school counselors to access cross-sex hormones. And in fact, in the state, I think it's Oregon, 15-year-olds can already do this. They can go and get cross-sex hormones and claim that they're the opposite sex with no regard for parents' involvement and so on. You see, they're doing this because before you know it, this will be so normal and be done behind the scenes that you will no longer be able to object. Why? Because you will have an emotional connection of knowing someone who has been there and been through this. Because this is what they are giving to our teenagers. This is what Planned Parenthood is encouraging. In fact, Planned Parenthood is the second largest provider of cross-sex hormones for teenagers and young adults. We've talked about this before. Young girls are coming out in droves and groups of friends identifying suddenly as transgender. Then you won't be able to deny this either because they'll continue to tell their stories and use PR slogans such as love is love and don't you love your friends and family members who are struggling? The Hill actually was talking about how Levine supports surgery for transgender children and how that claim that Senator Rand Paul said that is misleading. It's not misleading. This is what this agenda desires to do. He is trying to do the same thing for children, affirming what he did for his own life as identifying as transgender. But maybe he has regret that he didn't do it sooner, so now he's trying to force it on children, but he won't say that on the record. You see, the media is trying to claim that Levine doesn't believe this when he says that he would expedite the process. The media is also trying to spin this by using quotes from Rand Paul, using the word genital mutilation over and over again to make him sound crazy. But that's what top and bottom surgery are. But instead, what they're calling it is gender affirmative care. Don't be deceived by the language. There are physical consequences for children. And The Hill, like many other news articles, are saying things such as this. Research has shown puberty blockers, which are reversible, can reduce suicidal thoughts in transgender adolescents. That's a lie. The media is lying to you. Yes, you can stop taking puberty blockers, and they're not directly puberty blockers, they're cross-sex hormones. No one tells teenagers this is going to prevent them, if they take it prior to puberty, from actually developing as they are supposed to develop. No one says that. So yes, you can stop taking something, but that doesn't mean that your body will function as it was supposed to or continue the process of maturity into puberty that it was supposed to do. Not only that, that's actually wrong. A lot of people who started cross-sex hormones have to stay on them because their body cannot regulate back out. And so they become dependent on trying to find a new normal that has actually, their body's been damaged from all the damage that's been done. And here's the truth. Cross-sex hormones cause infertility. They can prevent puberty. A top surgery or bottom surgery, sure, can be fixed, so-called, to try and reconstruct the body parts that were there before, but a sex change isn't completely reversible. Damage is done so severely, and we are seeing people who are having to have hysterectomies, among other issues that are so severe, no one is talking about it. And these girls and boys who change their mind don't want to live out publicly what's happened to them, the pain they've gone through. Just because Prince Harry and Meghan Markle may want to talk about their horrible experience with the British monarchy doesn't mean someone who's been through cross-sex hormone therapy and top or bottom surgery wants to share their tell-all to the world. And the reality is the psychological consequences are huge. It's not true that it decreases suicidal thoughts. In fact, the suicidal thoughts don't go away. And many people, even from the trans community, admit that. In fact, suicide rates are going up, especially among those groups of young people who are coming out as transgender. There's increased depression and anxiety. And here's what's interesting. At the same time, girls are taking testosterone. One of the things they like is it can suppress anxiety. And this is one of the biggest problems for young girls who are turning to cross-sex hormone replacement therapy. But what are the philosophical consequences? This is causing a huge question around what it means to be a woman for the person who's being fed this transgender lie. Not only that, there are theological consequences. In addition to the health, both physical and emotional and psychological, the fact that God created us a male and female and we have a soul, and we are called to develop as people in our character as either male or female. God gave us different roles, different gifts, and different ways of relating to one another. Adam discovered in the garden that he was alone. He was looking for a complement, not someone who was the same as him, but similar. And the very thing that he loved about Eve was that she was something other than himself. This is why men love women and women love men, because we're different, and together we image God. This is so important. And don't forget, the American College of Pediatricians have shown, and countless other studies confirm this, that 80 to 95% of children will choose their biological sex after having experienced gender dysphoria by the time they grow into adolescence, only if they aren't coaxed into the transgender movement by adults. You want to learn more about this? You think this is wrong? Understand, there are consequences. But also understand there are countless people who have shared their stories, such as at sexchangeregret.com. And we actually had a Walt Heyer who transitioned and lived as a woman for about 8-9 years and then transitioned back. And he shares his story. We'll actually post a link on social media to that episode, so check out Twitter. We'll be sure to throw that up there. Sexchangeregret.com. Read and listen to the stories of people who have been there and said it doesn't make them happier. It doesn't decrease suicide. And it is such a thing as femininity and masculinity. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie. My guest today is psychologist Dr. Gregory Bottaro, and he's here to join me to discuss mindfulness. Dr. Bottaro, welcome to Trending.
Hey, thanks so much. Glad to be here with you. Pretty charged topic we're talking about here.
Yes, so let's shift gears and talk about what exactly is mindfulness, why do we want it, and what specifically is Catholic mindfulness?
Yeah, absolutely. And certainly in our time in our day and age here, we definitely need this. What it is it's really about self-awareness and learning how to be really attentive to what's going on inside our minds, inside of our hearts. St. Augustine prayed the prayer to know you, O Lord, and to know myself. And this is our journey, our path here is the struggle to really understand what the heck is going on inside of this brain, inside of this mind. And, as cultural confusion increases, the difficulty seems to increase to really understand ourselves even. And so if we have these tools, these techniques, these ways of understanding the way that God did make our brains, then, we can use that knowledge in an appropriate way to actually grow closer to Him, ultimately.
Now, let's unpack this a little bit more, because you're the writer of a book having to do with Catholic mindfulness. How do people work toward Catholic mindfulness? What are some of those concrete steps in that journey? Yeah,
absolutely. So, we have the book, The Mindful Catholic, Finding God One Moment at a Time. And the practical steps is learning how to pay attention with our 5 senses. So we have a series of exercises. We have some resources at CatholicPsych.com. And we have some of these things available for free. There's audio exercises. And what it does is it trains you through practical activities to just learn how to pay attention to what's happening right now. So like wherever you are, if you're sitting in a chair, that chair is communicating itself to your body through your physical senses, through your sense of touch on your skin.
I'm uncrossing my legs right now.
But you're not really paying attention to it. What's that?
I said I'm uncrossing my legs and putting my feet on the ground right now.
There you are. And you weren't even aware probably that your legs were crossed. But now, now that you draw your mind to it, you understand something that's happening in this present moment. And so we have this amazing ability to choose what we pay attention to in the present moment. You just chose, because I prompted you with bringing it up, to pay attention to the feeling of your legs, and now the feet, and now the floor. And then I can tell you, well, what's happening in your hands. And you draw your attention to the sensation of your physical sensory touch through your hands. So these are neurons that are communicating to your brain what's happening right now in this present moment. You're feeling your fingers now, not what happened 10 minutes ago. And in this present moment, you have actually 5 senses that are communicating to your brain what's really happening. So there's your smelling, your hearing, but these things you're not necessarily turning your attention towards. And you can choose. This is a skill that we have that we don't practice enough, we're not taught about, and we don't have great enough facility over choosing what we pay attention to. Now, we also have a 6th sense. I call the 6th sense, which is the imagination. And the imagination is another thing that we can pay attention to. But because we don't have enough facility over choosing what to pay attention to, oftentimes the 6th sense claims authority and takes away our choice, and we end up paying attention to our imagination without really thinking about it. And the whole point of mindful practice is learning how to gain freedom over what's happening inside our minds by learning that we can actually control what we pay attention to. We're going to think thoughts that come out of nowhere, and we can't stop that from happening. But we can stop ourselves from following the rabbit holes and the ruminations that pop up. Mm-hmm. And so instead of wasting our time in worry, we can listen to Jesus and not be anxious about the things of our life and actually turn our minds towards what's real in the present moment.
So it sounds like something really important you're saying is we have to overcome that 6th sense of imagination, or not that we're getting rid of the imagination, but that we're not letting our mind constantly wander to this state of distraction or being consumed by other things, so that we can be more present in our body, so that we can focus in on, let's say, the work at hand or prayer with God, whatever we're working on at the moment. Am I getting that right?
Yeah, basically, yeah. The imagination is a gift from God. So, what we basically want to do is free it to be what He created it for. And through our imagination, we can step outside of the present moment. We can go outside of time and space. And that's the beauty of meditation, of scriptural reflection. We place ourselves into the scripture, into the Rosary, and we bring ourselves to closer communion with God, who is outside of space and time. That's the proper use of the imagination. And that's the fullest use of it anyways. But instead, it gets hijacked by fear and by our biological system, which in itself is very good, our survival instinct. Mm-hmm. But then it gets hijacked, and without gaining control over it, we end up wasting our time in a lot of worry. And so we are distracted from even the good things like prayer, or even just a normal conversation with somebody, or even just eating a meal and really enjoying it with gratitude and being able to taste the taste and smell the smells.
Now, this is fascinating because someone might say, okay, Dr. Bottaro, I hear what you're saying, and you're basically talking about prayer as being part of your imagination. So someone might say, okay, well, I don't believe in God, and you're saying you're just kind of making up, using your imagination to wander and think about God and other things. But you're saying our imagination is a distinct gift to wonder and to ponder things, not just to create a make-believe world, which is what we often do, of creating our own reality about how we perceive various situations or how we overthink things as well.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, exactly. And so, yeah, it's sort of the highest level of the intellect is this ability to transcend what we see around us and abstract and sort of philosophize on ultimate truth. And that's using the intellect and in that way using a part of the imagination which steps outside of space and time, but thinking about what's true beyond all space and time. And so we have a way to decipher truth and have communion with God. And then with that in place, we can use tools like our imagination directed towards the true, good, and the beautiful that we make a decision towards. We're not just sort of flippantly making up whatever we feel like, but we're reasoning and processing and deciding. And that's the greatest human attribute, the greatest quality that we have is that freedom of choice, which is why it's such a hijack that pro-choice is the label of something so evil. But it's have choice is our greatest human dignity. And so we can choose what's true, good, and beautiful, and then use our different intellect and different faculties to move us towards God in the ways that make the most sense.
That's psychologist Dr. Gregory Bottaro. You can find him at CatholicPsych.com. We'll come back taking your questions and talking about how mindfulness can actually help us create meaningful silence and better prayer time. Was the royal tell-all from Meghan Markle and Prince Harry really about institutionalized racism and the stiff upper lip of the British aristocracy? I don't think so. This is Timmerie from Trending with Timmerie. I'll tell you what I think this Oprah tell-all was really about on Wednesday. Also, what is the best advice you could give to a young man today? Join me daily at 6 p.m. Central on Relevant Radio or the Relevant Radio app. Catholic Order of Foresters is proud to sponsor the Relevant Radio studio line. For information about employment opportunities and flexible premium life insurance plans, visit relevantradio.com/Forester.
So, what's trending? Bridging your Catholic faith with your everyday life. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie on Relevant Radio and the Relevant Radio app.
Psychologist Dr. Gregory Bottaro from CatholicPsych.com is with me. He's an author of a book having to do with Catholic mindfulness. We've talked about it before, but before you were discussing how our five senses are so important for mindfulness. You mentioned the sense of feeling. Question came in, how about hearing? How can we be more mindful of what we consume in terms of both hearing and visual?
Yeah, all of our senses need to be paid attention to, and it's really the secondary effect, though, of what comes after the initial sense. So when we hear something, then it triggers for us a series of thoughts. And so being able to make that distinction between sounds and thoughts is a really important process, and then we can start to understand why certain sounds might trigger certain kinds of thoughts. And then we can figure out what are better thoughts and what sounds will move us towards those better thoughts. There's not necessarily an objective quality, although obviously certain things like organ music, church music, chanting, nice bells, things like that are more likely to trigger other thought patterns that are more leading us towards something that's more of peace. And then, a long blaring siren or a loud gong or something that's, really unsettling, could trigger some bad thoughts. But to first understand that difference, make that distinction is a helpful way to sort of think about that. And then it's the same with all the senses. The thing in itself in that present moment is part of the created world. I mean, nothing is going to be intrinsically evil or wrong or bad in itself, but it's what happens within us once those things enter into us through our senses.
Dr. Bottaro, I read a number of years ago, and I reread it multiple times because I love this book. It's The Power of Silence Against the Dictatorship of Noise by Cardinal Sarah. And he talks about how kind of our overly simplified words, speeches, I'm going to say, for example, memes, and popularized images have essentially become the teachers of many of our lives. And I keep thinking about how our overconsumption, what we hear and see, is preventing us from actually having a legitimate response of being present to what we hear and see and even say. And we kind of just rant on social media. But in reality, the senses tell us about the world, and I feel like they're being suppressed as we allow for the constant noise of media consumption and just content consumption as a whole, just kind of be like a wave that's consuming us, knocking us down, and pulling us deeper into the ocean.
Yeah, one of the things that I talk about in my book is this concept of the autopilot. And again, these are God-given traits that we have in our brains, survival instinct and learning how to, we have a negativity bias, which keeps us on our toes around things that could be potentially threatening. But it's easy to sort of file things away into the autopilot, meaning that we're not going to be intentional about the way we approach certain things. And like this, social media is a great example of that. Like you just sort of get into a mode, and our brain is very efficient. It's saving energy, saving power. And if it doesn't need to sort of reapproach every new post, every new, if you see the news outlet and you already know sort of like what's going to come from that outlet, you're not going to be that discerning when you start to read it, or certain friends or certain family members or whatever. So as soon as you can become more efficient, your brain's going to find a way to do it. And that is, we're being bombarded by so much data, the brain needs to pick up even more in its efficiency. So we stop thinking and we start operating out of this autopilot. The problem is the brain is geared towards looking for negative things to be avoidant of. And we're going to be moving in this natural default way towards things that rob us of our peace and not give us peace. We need to be intentionally stepping in to actually move ourselves towards peace.
So mindfulness is so important because what you're saying points to the fact that there is literally a hormonal response of our fight or flight hormone, cortisol, kicking in, even just as we're consuming media, trying to kind of flee away from those things that can be triggers. And the reality is I open my Instagram and I just scroll 2 or 3 photos and right away there are triggers right there. And so are we constantly then triggering those stress hormones?
Yeah, and the thing that's really sort of devious about the whole thing, and I guess it's kind of neutral, but in terms of the social media companies, this whole thing with artificial intelligence and AI that Facebook, Instagram, all these are using, is they're measuring in real time what is actually affecting your fight or flight response. And they're modifying the content they're putting in front of you based on that response. So this becomes a really dangerous dynamic.
Yeah. Yeah, because we've seen some of the top creators, I think it was of Netflix in particular, talked about how essentially he wants to make it so that you are addicted to their content. They're using all of this research so that we become an even greater consumer. Now, why? Because they make more money, more eyeball power, binge-worthy content, the better. So the question at hand is, how do we use your techniques of Catholic mindfulness to incorporate more silence, peace, and ultimately have a better prayer life?
Absolutely. So you have to wrestle away some block of time. There's no way around it. It's hard. And then once you can sort of get your foot in that door before it closes on you and locks, you gotta shove your foot in that door, keep it open a crack, and then just wedge it open a couple more inches. And then it's like, okay, what do I do with the space of time? So you find 10 minutes in the morning, you find 10 minutes in the afternoon, 10 minutes before bed. And now you have to think about what you're using that time for. And that's where tools and techniques like the Mindful Catholic become really powerful, because by using those 10 minutes to read something that will help you find 10 more minutes becomes exponentially helpful. And that's what the exercises do. You have to crack open that first 10 minutes. But if you're willing to do the hard work to fight that addiction and to actually make that space, then that's where we come in, and these tools and techniques can be really helpful.
I love it. So whether it's reading, prayer, you have to fight for what you've started and get through those first 10 minutes. It's so easy to kind of be like, oh, the kettle's boiling. Ooh, I want a cup of tea. Oh, I can throw one more little laundry in and respond to this text message.
And especially with prayer, because people fight. And they're like, all right, I'm going to pray a whole rosary and I'm going to get it in. And then they go to painstaking lengths to fight that fight. And they get in their rosary, but they spend their rosary and their prayer is filled with all sorts of negativity, and there's sort of negative self-speak and self-blame and shame, and I'm not praying it well enough, and there's layers upon layers of all of these other narratives that are going on. And so that's why I say the 10 minutes with the Catholic mindfulness becomes exponentially powerful, because then you realize that the 20 minutes you fought for the rosary can become even more fruitful when you're connecting with the truth of divine mercy and how God is actually blessing you and how much he really loves you, so that even 3 minutes taken out of your day to spend with him should bless you and fill you with more peace. But we self-sabotage. So we have to figure out like what it is that we're doing to ourselves. And that's where these other techniques come in.
Let's use this rosary example, because I think this is really concrete, and it's something I'm struggling with right now to stay present during the rosary with my prayer. What tips do you have for staying present in specifically praying the rosary?
Well, we have to use all the senses. That's one of the beauties of the rosary. So you're holding the beads. You're using your sense of touch and letting your mind just focus in on the bead itself. But what I always start with, I have to start with some deep breathings, just a couple of deep breaths. And I pray a little prayer. Ever-present God, here with me now. Help me to be here with you. That's my mindfulness prayer that I start every prayer with. Ever-present God, here with me now. Help me to be here with you. We place ourselves in the presence of God, really calling it to mind cognitively. And then that's a little prayer of supplication. Help me be here with you now. And so we're inviting the Holy Spirit to actually work with our brains. And it's getting us sort of tuned in to this fact of like this present moment. And then you start, the beads are in the present moment. The sound that the beads make is in the present moment. And then you bring into the prayer the scriptural reflection. And you can use your imagination. So that is happening in that present moment. And you're using your imagination, calling to mind the scene, putting yourself in it maybe if that's how you pray the rosary, inviting Mary's presence to be with you. And so, it's a practical way. It's not just like, let me grab my beads, I'm driving in the car, I'm out for a walk, whatever. But it's like, I'm going to intentionally enter in and bring my whole mind and body into this prayer moment.
So repeat that prayer one more time. Ever-present God.
Ever-present God, here with me now. Help me to be here with you. And I pray this like 100 times a day, but it's like, especially first starting the day. And I might pray 10 times in the shower before like the 11th time, and it hits me. I'm like, oh my God, you are here with me now. Like you're actually here with me. Like in this room, you're present with me. And all of a sudden, nothing matters. Nothing could possibly be wrong or go bad enough to take away from the fact that my God, who made me and loves me infinitely, is here with me. He knows me, he loves me, and he's actually with me now. And if we can bring that to our minds, all of a sudden when Jesus says, do not be anxious about the things of your life, like it makes sense. We don't have to be anxious about the things of our life. His presence is real.
Amen. Amen. This is so helpful because we have literally God came in the flesh and gave us his body. He recognizes the need of our senses. He accommodates human nature, and we need to accommodate our own human nature in prayer. So let's take a little bit of time to talk about how Saint Joseph can be truly the model for us of using silence properly.
Oh, good. Absolutely. Yeah. So St. Joseph, I co-wrote with Jen Settle from the Theology of the Body Institute, a consecration preparation, and it's available at catholicpsych.com/St. Joseph. And it's a 44-day preparation to go from March 19th to May 1st.
Okay. I have to ask you a question real quick and interrupt you.
Sure.
Did you plan this before our Holy Father announced the year of St. Joseph, or was this totally providential?
No, we actually wrote this last year, and
awesome.
and so I planned this out 2 years ago, and then I actually wrote out the daily reflections from last year, from March 19th. Every day we're writing the next reflection and then publishing it online, And then afterwards, everybody was asking us to put it into a book. So we're also concurrently launching the Catholic Psych Press, and this is going to be our first published book. And so all that information is online. And none of that I had any idea about the Holy Father announcing the year of St. Joseph.
Exciting. Very exciting. So let's come back to St. Joseph and how he can teach us about silence.
Yeah, absolutely. So what we see with St. Joseph, and I wish, the beginning of your segment here, talking about the masculine and feminine stuff, I actually just recorded a podcast today that's going to be out next week, talking about the masculinity of St. Joseph and how the masculine genius embodied in St. Joseph is the most important thing that our culture needs today. And
Amen.
Obviously we have a lot of confusion around masculinity and femininity. And I was saying how St. Joseph heals the distortions of masculinity. There's right reason to be suspicious and fearful of the distortions of masculinity. But St. Joseph embodies the perfection of masculinity. And so that's why we need him right now, because we need fathers, we need fatherhood, we need masculinity. And so in St. Joseph's strength, he embodies a courage and a testosterone-fueled strength that is trustworthy and gentle and reverent and prudent. And he knows how to be in control with that strength, but he knows how to be obedient with it first. So he subjugates all of his strength and power that he has in his masculinity to the sonship first that he has of God the Father. And so we talk about, good St. Joseph, he's silent, he doesn't have any words in Scripture, but his silence is the first indication of his prayerfulness and his reverence and his inner worship of the presence of God. So everything we're talking about in the first half here, he had that by nature. He was perfected in that interiorly. And so he wasn't just silent. He was creating an active, vibrant, full of vitality. The life and fruitfulness that emanated from Joseph was literally what made him the father of Jesus, not biologically, but he was spiritually and humanly chosen to be the father of the Savior of the world in this world. And so when we look at silence, it's not boring, it's not mundane, it's not it's not something that's static or empty. It's the most powerful, life-giving. That's why it's the power of silence from Cardinal Sarah. It's like this is an untapped resource that this world has no idea what it's sitting on, what each one of us individually have no idea what we're missing. So we need to, through this consecration, I talk a lot about this, about masculinity, femininity, about the Holy Family, to heal the wounds of all of our families of origin, and how we need Joseph as a dad and Mary as a mom so that we can enter most deeply into our baptism through Jesus Christ and union with their Son. And so, but that's how we restore the fullest capacity of our hearts. And so for men listeners, we need Joseph as models. And for your women listeners, we need Joseph as the complement to your femininity. And so that you receive Joseph's masculinity that blesses your femininity and actually restores it and elevates it and complements it so that you become the fullest human that you were created to be. So Joseph is strikingly missing, and we need him back.
Isn't it fascinating? If you're just joining us, that's Dr. Gregory Bottaro. He's a Catholic psychologist. The culture says that men are irrelevant, and they make fun of men. They're the buffoons, they're the laughing stock of so many TV shows today, and actually of many families. They're ignored or degraded and emasculated so often. And as the culture says men are irrelevant, what you're saying and what Cardinal Sarah has said about silence really seems so prevalent. Cardinal Sarah said that the silent man is just one man too many, essentially. And he goes on to talk about how the silent man is essentially reduced to nothingness in our culture. Today's culture would not have any respect for St. Joseph because of his silence. And so we are being so countercultural by saying, no, this is the year of St. Joseph. St. Joseph matters, and in fact, he teaches us so much about masculinity. It's It's unheard of because it is silent, because so many men do have that silent contemplative part of their character of recovery that's so important, yet they're rejected for that silence.
Yeah, 100%. And what I talk about too is this division between men and women needs to be healed and restored by a sense of complementarity, which means that there's a collaboration that's necessary between men and women, which restores humanity to its fullest capacity. And there has to be that reverence for what men bring to the table. And it's not enough on its own, and it's not complete. Neither is what women bring to the table. That's the whole point of man and woman. He created them. But what men bring to the table is very complementary and in some ways opposite of what women bring to the table. And women, as we've talked about a lot, through the feminine genius, are more oriented towards persons. What men bring to the table is a detachment from persons. And that doesn't mean that they don't love persons or they won't die for persons, but there's not that biologically based orientation towards relationship in the same way that it's found in the feminine brain. And what that affords for man is a kind of separation at times when it's prudent to go deeper into things like silence, where there aren't other people necessarily with him.
That's Dr. Gregory Bottaro. You can find him at CatholicPsych.com along with his books. I'll be back in just a bit to talk about prayer, fasting, and mercy, how to get your prayers answered, and how Instagram has become a new religion.
We're talking about what you're thinking about. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie on Relevant Radio and the Relevant Radio app.
Have you ever prayed a prayer and it wasn't answered? Yesterday on Trending, I was talking about how sometimes we find ourselves unhappy, mad at God, or even no longer practicing our religion because God didn't answer a petition we asked for. So here's the question that I want to talk about today. How do you get your petitions answered? Isn't that an important question? We're in the middle of Lent and we're supposed to be doing all of this prayer, fasting, and almsgiving, right? But what is it supposed to do? It's supposed to bring about spiritual growth, detachment from sin in the world, and attachment to God. Well, God allows us to suffer. God allows us to pray to Him so that ultimately it brings about those same exact things. Detachment from the world, attachment to God, and ultimately trying to make it so that we can enter into the beatific vision and enter into the presence of Him and the life of the world to come after death. But we don't always like joining the process it takes to get there. So I was reading a homily by one of the early church fathers, St. Peter Chrysologus, and it's titled Prayer Knocks, Fasting Obtains, and Mercy Receives. And he talks about how there are three things necessary for faith to remain firm and for devotion to stand constant. He says this: prayer knocks, fasting obtains, and mercy receives. These three are one, and they give life to each other. For example, we have the example of Luke chapter 9. It's one of my favorite stories of the Transfiguration. What happens when Peter, James, and John come down the mountaintop, come down from Mount Tabor with Jesus? Well, the other apostles are trying to cast out this demon out of the demoniac. He's possessed. They can't do it. Who knows how long they've been at it? We know that they were up on the mountain for a day or so because they didn't return, that's Peter, James, John, and Jesus, from Mount Tabor until the next day. So who knows how long they were attempting to go through this exorcism. And they're going, Lord, we couldn't cast out this demon. What does Jesus tell them? Some demons are only cast out with prayer and fasting. What does the church offer to us for 40 days during Lent? Well, the church offers us the opportunity to, hello, are you listening? Catholics, wake up. Pray and fast to root out those demons in your life. But are we doing that? And so I think that when I was reading this homily by St. Peter Chrysologus, it was so helpful because it tells us the truth. Prayer knocks, fasting obtains, and mercy receives. He says fasting is the soul of prayer. It's true, because it's one thing to pray for something, but it's another thing to do something, not just say, I want this, I want that, wow, wow, wow. We're no better than a baby who's crying for everything she wants. Yes, I have a baby right now. Aren't we supposed to be more mature than a child who just begs for everything? They're supposed to do that. They're dependent. You and I, yes, are dependent upon God, but we are at a point where we can participate. As God calls us to pick up our cross and follow him, to participate in our salvation, to go to Golgotha. Now, St. Peter Chrysologus says that mercy is the lifeblood of fasting. Why? Because when we fast with prayer, all of a sudden, if we really do mean that prayer and we really do mean that fasting, and it's not just about me and a pat on the back of what I've accomplished or what other people see me doing, well, born from that prayer and fasting will be mercy. It's the lifeblood of fasting. Why? Because born of it will be generosity, patience, going beyond just what I feel like doing, and in fact, even going beyond what the other person deserves, instead of being merciful and gracious and generous to them. This is where I think about Blessed Pier Giorgio Frassati. He had this saying, verso alto, which means to the heights. And he'd look at from the bottom of the mountain, because he was a very outdoorsy person, and he'd look up to the top of the mountain, and he'd say this, to the heights. Do we have that same attitude when we are fasting and praying that will lead us to mercy? He said, if you want your petition to be heard, listen up. This is what I was talking about yesterday. If you want your petition to be heard, hear the petitions of others. It is human to seek the good of the other person. Why? Adam was alone in the garden in Genesis chapter 2. Listen to our human anthropology from a biblical perspective. Adam was alone in the garden. God created Eve. She was a complement to him. The creation of Adam and Eve revealed the importance of the human dimension, the personal dimension, the desire for another person for their own sake and for the good of the other. That reveals and helps us better understand that if you want your petition to be heard, hear the petitions of others. What do others want? How can I help answer their prayers? How can my prayer and fasting, my turning to God in prayer and fasting, be a means of God working through me out of love and generosity and his transforming of my heart to be merciful to others in their petitions? You want your prayers to be answered? Make your petition in prayer a true prayer. Don't just ask for something. Be transformed by someone. Surrender to your prayer and fasting. Surrender to God and his providence and his timing. And what will happen is the answer to your prayer, your petition may be yes, it may be no, or it may be not yet. But if you are truly turning to God with your petition, you will either understand the answer to that prayer, or you will love and accept the answer to that prayer. And so prayer, fasting, and almsgiving isn't just a pat on the back. It's not just about wanting to kick our soda addiction. I'm sorry if you gave up soda, but that's not enough for a Lenten sacrifice. If you're over drinking soda, it's already something you shouldn't be doing. If you have an objection, I would love to hear it. We'll talk about it more. Do something more. So have your prayers answered. And remember this, prayer knocks, fasting obtains, and mercy receives. God will transform your heart no matter the answer he has to our prayer, because we will trust in him. We will trust in his providence and his great love for you and I. Tomorrow, what I think about Meghan Markle and Prince Harry on Oprah. Was the royal tell-all from Meghan Markle and Prince Harry really about institutionalized racism and the stiff upper lip of the British aristocracy? I don't think so. This is Timmerie from Trending with Timmerie. I'll tell you what I think this Oprah tell-all was really about on Wednesday. Also, what is the best advice you could give to a young man today? Join me daily at 6 p.m. Central on Relevant Radio or the Relevant Radio app.